Hello and welcome to your screencast on the OT process. We're going to be linking this into the workshop that you're going to be doing myself and Annette on Monday, and thinking about where the assessment part might fit into this. Got our little lady there looking very happy with herself. She's obviously gone through the OT process, achieved all her goals and regained her independence. So learning outcome for today's session, we're just going to talk through the process. Think about the OT, where you fit into it, where you saw this process happening on placement, and also having them sort of continual reflections throughout and thinking about how it works and where your role fits in. So the first point is referral and triage. So the referral can be made, there's some services that accept self-referral, so some patients will refer themselves. Referrals can be made from multidisciplinary teams, or you might hear of them as MDTs, but also referrals can come from family members or other parties, and there's usually a referral criteria. So when people are referring into a service, there's usually a set of criteria that they have to fit. So for example, if somebody's been referred into a fall service, it might be that they have to have had a fall within the last 6 months, let's say, to be accepted into the service. So usually you'll find it'd be good when you go out on placement to find out what the referral criteria is for that service that you're working for. And the triage process is where they go through the referrals and they might prioritise which patients need to be seen, and they might allocate patients to certain team members. So when you're out, if you've been on your observation placement, maybe think, have you ever seen a referral form, or have you actually completed a referral form? And have you seen that triaging process as well? So these are just some examples. So usually you'd have a name, you'd have the date of birth, you would have their address, carer details, the referrer's name and address, and the referrer's contact number. Usually something you need the GP and the GP's address. That's usually quite useful for if you're working with things like System 1 to get them onto the system. It's generally quite standard. The referral forms will vary from one service to another, but the information is generally the same. And lots of places now are doing electronic referrals, because they were finding with the handwritten referrals that people were omitting to fill in key information, things were missed, sometimes writing can be illegible. So there are pros and cons to referral forms. I much prefer the electronic referrals, just for when I was in practice, the issues with people not filling in the forms correctly. But generally the information is the name and address and reason for referral. So the next stage of the process is information gathering. Just move that off there because that's blocking us a little bit. So this is the information gathering stage. This is where you'll be sat with your client, and you'll be asking them lots of questions, gathering lots of information, almost being like a detective really, and finding out why they're there, why they've been referred, what are the current issues, what were they like before, what support network have they got, what they might have already had some interventions before, so some adaptations that they've already got, looking at the home environment. And also looking, this is really important as well, is looking at what other services have been involved. So if you as an OT are going out to see a patient, but you can see on the record that they've already been seen by an OT a couple of months before, it might be actually getting in touch with that occupational therapist, because what you don't want to do is ask the patient questions that they've already been asked before. So it is really gathering as much information as you can before, and gathering information when you've got the patient there with you, and that liaison with other health professionals, with which, you know, it links into all your interprofessional working and your collaborative working. Just a question there is, why do you think you might need to ring family members? So in what situation, if during this information gathering process do you think you might need to include family members? It might be if you've got a client with dementia, somebody who's maybe not able to answer questions, or they might answer questions but they're not giving you accurate information because of their condition. It might be somebody who's potentially got aphasia, so they're unable to communicate verbally. So it might be that you have to adapt how you gather that information. Might be that they've got a hearing impairment, so if you're trying to do that over the phone. So there's lots of reasons why you might have to involve family members. The thing to be mindful of at that point is that you still want the patient to be the lead on that. You still want them to feel empowered and in control. It's their health, it's their future that you're talking about. What can sometimes happen is you get family members involved, is they can sort of take over and the patient sort of gets lost. So you do need to be mindful with that. But it is good, and there are situations where you will need to sort of involve the family as well. So then you move on to your initial interview and your assessment. So this session is intended to present a picture of the patient's previous abilities, and it's then giving you a baseline of assessment of tasks. So you might be looking at things like getting up from the chair, getting in and out of the bed. You might do a cognitive assessment. And what this helps you, so when you're getting that picture of what their previous abilities were, so say for instance you might have an elderly lady who's come in and had a fall and she's fractured a hip and she's had an operation and she's now obviously struggling to get out of bed on her own, maybe using a walker, Zimmer frame, maybe needing assistance walking, but she actually fractured a hip walking into town. And she was walking unaided. So you can see there that that lady's got lots of potential there. She was totally independent before this hip fracture. So you've got your baseline there to see what you've got to work towards. It's a really important part of the OT process, the initial interview and gathering, getting that information from your client. It's where you build your therapeutic rapport, the relationship, and building that sort of trust and empathy for the patient. And again, at this point, you might want to involve other MD team members as well. And there she is. That's how she feels after she's had your initial assessment, because she's starting to feel listened to, she's starting to feel valued, she feels empowered because somebody's sitting, taking the time to listen and take on board her sort of thoughts and feelings and views. So they're all looking very happy there. They've just had their OT come to see them. So this might be something this is just a very basic one, and like I say, they will all vary from different areas. But again, name, they'd have the date of birth. You might ask about their ADLs, so you might look at the hygiene, bathing, dressing, toilets, the functional ability. You'd look at their kitchen, whether they're able to prepare a meal, whether they do their own shopping, whether they do their own laundry. Look at the finances. You might look at the social network. It's quite an in-depth assessment here. It's multifaceted and it's looking at the patient from a very holistic point of view. And I remember when I worked in a full service, I would ask about the continence, I would ask about the medication. So it should be a top to toe assessment. So from that assessment, then you can start thinking about what the person's needs are, some of the issues that they might be having, but also solution finding as well. So you can be identifying some of the difficulties, concerns, and as you're doing that, you're feeding back to the patient, feeding back to the team. So an example might be a patient falling frequently. You would assess their walking ability, their energy levels, and maybe trip hazards in the home, and then liaise with the MDT to see if you might have picked up that medication might be an issue. So from the assessment, as you're working through the assessment, you can start to pinpoint some of the things that you're going to focus in on, and also the patient, the client themselves can start to pinpoint what are the priorities, what's important to them, what's meaningful to them. So this is just an example, but a problem might be they're unable to get on and off their chair independently, and the solution is you might raise the chair, you would provide chair exercise to strengthen the legs, and you might practice activities of daily living as well to strengthen the legs. So you'd move on from there. Is this when you get into the goal setting? So from the difficulties highlighted, you negotiate goals with the clients. So usually the main one for people, particularly in hospital, would be going home. So say, for instance, their goal is you've met your client and they want to get home. So the goal is to be able to get up from their chair independently. So this is what they'd be able to do to get themselves home. So the steps would be doing their exercises, attending physio and OT sessions, maybe walking to the toilet instead of using a commode, because it might be that the nurses have been using one of the wheeled commodes to get them to the toilet, but you're focusing on trying to get the strength and balance back, so you encouraging them to walk to the toilet instead of the commode. It's important at this point to help the client identify what some of the barriers might be as well, and having that sort of open, honest discussion, because motivation might be a big thing. You know, they're in hospital, they've been in there for a week or so, they've had a major operation, they might be feeling quite low in mood and fed up, and that might affect their motivation, and their environment that they're in as well might be affecting them. So putting a time limit on your goals is really important. It helps people get focused, and it helps them achieve their goals. And this is also really important as well, a reward. So making sure that the client actually rewards themselves for their goal. And it might be something as simple as having a coffee with their friend. So action. So once you've carried out the actions outlined in the previous steps, so it's actually doing what you've set to do. So the chair exercises, the walking to the toilet, the OT sessions, physio sessions. So that's actually doing what you planned to do. And then you've got your ongoing assessment. So you'd be looking at your outcomes are reviewed. Next steps. So it might be that you go back to problem formation until they're meeting the desired goal, because it might be that they've not achieved the goal, so you have to reevaluate and reassess. It might be that they've got a chest infection in between, or which has knocked them back, or they might have had a urinary tract infection that's knocked them back, so you have to go back to the start, reassess and plan the goals again. So things happen unexpected that could affect that sort of smooth process. So this is modified until the therapist and both, actually it should be the patient first and the therapist are both satisfied. And if they're still unable to reach the goals, then look at other options or explore other more compensatory approaches. Then you do your outcome measures. So looking at outcome measures and measure them against the baseline, which helps you identify improvements. And we'll be using some of these in the session that myself and Annette are going to be doing on Monday. So it could be that when Doris first came to see us, her time walk was 2 minutes 30 seconds, and now it's 1 minute 10 seconds, and she's able to get out of chair on her own. So you've got a real baseline there of improvement. There she is. She's over the moon. And that's then the last part is the end of your intervention. I'll just move this, sorry, because it's in the way a little bit. So the end of the intervention, so this is where the patient is discharged or moved on to another service. And then review, so you look over your input, evaluate your efficiency and competencies, and often reflecting on more complex patients, and maybe keep OTs in practice, maybe keeping an anonymous record to build up and learn from past experience. So the review bit's a bit of a sticky one, and I've just put a bit of a reflection thought there is, do you think this happens out in practice? Because I think this is the bit we often miss out when you're probably out on placement and seeing OTs, is that when patients get discharged, that review step is lost. I've only ever been in one service where we did do that, and it's a really important part. But obviously once the patient's discharged, they get more referrals, they get new patients. But I think that's important to encourage that review process for that, that continued learning, and reflection, really. So that's the OT process. It's about continual reflection and re-evaluating and constant sort of reassessing. And it's also, when you're out on placement, it's acknowledging and accepting that each placements are different and they work in different ways, but the OT process should be transferable across all services, and they might do it in slightly different ways, or they might spend more time in one area than another, but it shouldn't matter what area you're in, is that process should fit. And I think it's really good when you're out there as students to